Alright, you'll have to excuse me for my voice. I'm a little bit ill at the minute, but I thought I was going to make this video anyway, or try to at least, because I've taken the day off work. If you're anything like me, a lot of the time when you sit down to try and make tunes, sometimes for whatever reason it's just not working. You know, you can't get any ideas down, or you know, the creativity isn't really working, or you haven't really got any inspiration. But it's still, you want to actually do something productive, or you want to sit down and actually still do something that's going to be useful. And in times like that, I quite like the analogy of the prep cook. You know, the guy in the restaurant that he's not the main chef, he's just the guy that, you know, peels the carrots and chops the onions and everything before service, so that when it comes to it, the chef can just whack it all together and he doesn't have to worry about all of that prep work. So that, I think that's quite a good analogy for stuff that you can do on your own when you're not actually actively making music, but you still want to be, you know, sitting and doing something that's going to help you in the future. So what I'm going to show you how what I'm going to show you how to do is to take a whole load of multi-samples, which you've probably got sitting on your hard drive. You know, if you're anything like me, you've got, you know, maybe Loopmasters packs or anything like that, and a lot of the time those sample CDs will come with multi-samples. That is synth sounds, or synth, you know, they've programmed an analog synth or something, and then they will have recorded a whole bunch of different files at different pitches and labeled them. And I'm just going to show you how you can load all of those into a sampler and map it all so that, you know, all of those different pitches that have been recorded are mapped properly over the keyboard, so you can play them back as live patches. Now, you might have seen this done before, but what I'm going to show you specific to the Ableton sampler is how you can load lots of different sounds, so lots of different timbres, how you pronounce that word, all into the same sampler, and then have an easy way to kind of swap between them. So I'll just jump into it. So we'll load up a sampler here. Now, the first thing I'm just going to show you quickly to kind of illustrate the overall sort of idea, I guess. I'm just going to do very quickly, just drop a kick in here. Something like that, just something basic. Now, when you first drop a sample into a sampler without doing anything else, you'll see down here there's this root key, which defaults to C3. Now what that means is that the sampler thinks that this sample that you've loaded into it is at a C3 pitch, and so if I hit C3 on my keyboard, it's just going to play that sample back at the original pitch. Now the thing is that there's every chance that the sample isn't at C3, you know, it's just defaulted it to that because it needs a default. So what we can do in this instance, what's generally good to do for kicks, is you have a look on a spectrum. So I've just hit C3 there, and we can see that, as with many kicks do, it has this peak, this fundamental peak there, and that can tell you the pitch. So if you look in the bottom left hand corner here, there's a little meter which will tell you the frequency and also the pitch of that frequency. So we can just have a quick look here, and that's B0. So we can tell the sampler now that this sample is in B0. So we drag the root note all the way down to B0, and then whatever key I play on my keyboard now, it will play it back at the actual pitch that I'm pressing. So, for example, if I press a F, then you can see here that this peak will be at an F, see F1. So that's the gist, basically, how you can, you know, make sure that the sample is playing back at the actual pitch that you're playing. So when you're actually in the tune and you're trying to program leads or chords, you know that it's all in the right pitch. Okay, now what we're going to do is a little bit more complicated than that, so I'll just get rid of this and put in a new one. Now for this example, I'm going to use the Tom Middleton Deep Bass House sample pack, which is an absolutely wicked pack for all sorts. It's got loads of percussion sounds, but the synth noises in it are absolutely amazing. So what I'm going to do is I'll just navigate to sounds to here. So we've got bass multi-samples and instrument multi-samples, so I'll go to this one first. Now what you'll see here is the way this is laid out is that each of these folders corresponds to a different sound. You could think of these a little bit like presets, you know, like you have presets on a VST synth. This is a specific sound, so all of these notes are the same sound, but as you can see, they've all been recorded at different pitches, you see? So if I go through, etc. So what we're going to do is click down here on this zone tab on the sampler, and you see this area here, you can load multiple samples into here. So this has got quite a few recordings in it, so I might just do a different one and see if any of these have got, oh, they've all been recorded. I won't do those because it'll take a little too long. I'll just use this to show you the point of it. Oh, that's a bit better. Okay, so these are bass sounds. So these all correspond to the same sound. So I'm going to drag all of these in to this area. Now, you can see here these green bars. This is the kind of the important bit. The green bars signify that that basically they cover the whole range of the keyboard. So at the minute, actually no, I'm jumping ahead there a little bit actually. So basically what we've done here is we've dropped all these samples in, and you can see that all of these roots have been defaulted back to C3. Now we don't want that obviously, because these are, we know what notes these are because they've been recorded and they're in the file names. So we can just quite easily look at this one. This first one says C0, and so we can go straight down to the root key and we can drag it all the way down to C0. You might find it easier actually. You see on these bars the R here signifies where the root note is, so sometimes it's easy to actually follow that with your eyes as you're dragging these down. So I'll just do this quickly. So that one's down to C1, this one's C2, this one's G0, this one's G1, where's that, G1, and this one's G2. Okay, so we've told the sampler now that this is what all of the pitches are at. Now, importantly, what we need to do is we just need to select these, and then we right click and click on distribute ranges around root key. Now, as you can see here, these green bars signify when I play a note on the piano roll up here, if it lines up with the green bar against this sample, then that is the sample at which is going to be getting played. Now, it knows now that this sample, for example, is C0. So if I were to actually play the note C0, then it would just play it back at its original pitch. But because it knows, the sampler knows what key it's in, if I play a different note, so if I play one down here, in fact I'll just try and do it. Okay, so if I play one down here, it knows that that, for example, is an E, and so it's pitch shifted this sample down to the relevant bit. Now, because the multi-samples weren't recorded down this far, then once we get into this, it's starting to have to pitch shift it quite a lot. Now, the whole idea of doing this process is that you want to avoid pitch shifting. The idea being that all of these notes will be getting played back as close to the original recording pitch as possible. So if I play a C1, see, it's playing this one here, which is actually recorded at C1. So the idea is that we're only having to pitch shift it maybe a handful of semitones each time we play it. And we've mapped it all across the keyboard. Okay, so that's just done that for one sound. Okay, so we're going to group these together essentially, and we're just going to leave that as one sound. Now, in order to, we could, if we wanted, we could just save this as a patch now, and we could load that and we could leave it in our library. But what's a bit more efficient is to load more than one into this single sampler. So I'll do another one. So this is a different sound entirely. Interesting one. So we'll drag that in as well, and what we'd have to do is we'd have to repeat this process. We'd have to go back and we'd have to reassign all of the root notes. Now I'll show you a way to do that a little bit quicker, but first I'm going to just explain how we separate these basically. But we only want one of these to play at the same time, and at the minute, as you can see, once we've done this, they're going to overlap. So, you know, if we played this note here, whichever of these samples ends up having the root note around here, that's going to be playing both at the same time, which we don't want, because then, you know, we want these sounds to be independent. So the trick to fixing this in Ableton is to use the chain selector. So what this does here is all these bars, which currently spread over this whole range of 0 to 127, what we can do is we can take each of these sounds and drag all of these bars across, just so it's a single width. So this has only got a width of 1. And then this chain selector here, if this will mean that the sampler will only play back the samples that are in line with the chain selector. So if we take this second noise, drag them all over as well, and then just move it across one, then that means that as long as the sample selector is in the far leftmost position, then only these samples will be getting played. All right, so we've kind of separated them then. So even though their key splits are going to overlap, because the selector chains are different, then it means that we'll only be playing one at a time. So then we can automate this and we can map it to a macro, and then it can be easy to swap between all these different sounds. So you can do this for all of them. Now I'll show you one that I made earlier in true Blue Peter fashion. Only English people understand that reference, but here's one where I've actually done this, been through this process. So this is all of the Tom Middleton instrument samples, the ones that I actually showed you earlier. Now the reason I didn't do it was because each one has all of these different sounds. It would have taken ages just to demonstrate it. But here, what I've done is I've done that exactly that process that I just showed you, and I've repeated it for all of them. So I've loaded the whole folder of sounds into this one sampler. And as you can see, all of the chain selection bars have all been moved across in incremental slots. Now there's how many? There's 20. So there's 21 sounds in this. Now to make this into a nice playable kind of patch, what I've done is I've taken this sampler and I've grouped it into an instrument rack. And then I've just tried to set up some macros which I think are going to be useful. So I'll just go through those and I'll show you exactly how this works. So the first and the most important one is sound select. So the sound select macro maps straight onto this chain selector up here. So you can see that when I move this up and down, I've changed the range from 0 to 20 so that this macro, I can twist it through its whole range and it will only cover these sounds which I've actually got samples for, because if you don't change that, then the sample selector will just go all the way over to 127, and it's just a waste of space, I suppose. So that's one, and then the other ones are just fairly straightforward standard synth settings that you'd have. I've got the filter frequency here, and I've set it up so that when it's in its rightmost position, the filter actually turns off. So I'm just going to start, I'll just tinker these on my MIDI keyboard, so that's there. So the filter pops on as soon as I move it in a little bit. Resonance, as you'd expect. Filter envelope amount. And then the bottom row is just normal attack, decay, sustain, release. Now I've doubly mapped the decay parameter to the filter decay and also the amp decay. Now you might not want that. A lot of the time I end up having those set somewhere roughly similar because it gives you like a nice stabby type filter effect. So I mean, you can listen to how all this stuff sounds. I've just dropped a chord, one of my favourite sort of house chords, so I can just play chords only using one key. This is not on the right one, hold on. So that's one. This is quite low actually. So I'm just cycling through the sound selector, so it's just going from one, I guess you'd call them presets, to the next. See, and then I can play the filter and all the stuff that you'd normally do. See, so I mean, I'm not obviously just messing around there, hitting random keys, but so you can see how this would be useful. So I mean, once you've got this and you've built it and you've mapped it however you want, I mean, you can obviously be as creative as you want in setting these things up. But this is just how I've done it, just for these particular ones. Depending on what sound you'd loaded in. I mean, I wouldn't load up a mixture of a load of synth sort of pad sounds and bass sounds, for example, because if it was a bass sound, the chances are you'd want to change the polyphony down here to down to 1. You might want to change the velocity sensitivity here, or any number of things that you might want to set up differently for a bass versus a synth. But again, that's just up to you to set this up. Now, I mentioned that I'd try and show you a quick way of setting these things up. So I'll just show you that quickly now. So what you can do, which I find, rather than the process I went through before when I just went to a single, I went to a single folder and then I mapped them all individually, you can actually do that a little bit more quickly. So I'm just going to use the Tom Middleton bass sounds here because they were only recorded at 4 pitches, which makes this technique a little bit better. So bass hits. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, instead of navigating through here, I'm actually going to use Finder, because you can actually do it a little bit faster using the find a search function. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open the zone tab here. Now here is the bass hits folder. So each of these were only recorded at 4 pitches: C1, C2, C3 and C4. Okay, now what you can do this in Explorer as well, it works just as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to navigate to the folder containing all of these, and then I'm going to go to search and just type in C1. Alright, now that's wrong, isn't it? So this will, basically that's given me all of the C1 recorded samples in one go. So I'm going to drag all those in together. And the reason this is faster is because it means I can change the root key all at once. So I can drag them all down together. Alright, and then similarly I'll go back for C2. Same again. C3 will be faster because it defaults to C3, so we won't have to actually change it. And then finally C4. Drag those into C4, there we go. Okay, so these are all obviously now not in their groups, they're grouped according to their root notes, but what we can do is we can just now go to sort alphabetically, which will regroup them. So you can see now all of the samples, that's a single sound, and that's been put in, its root keys are all correct. So we just need to right click, go to distribute ranges around root key. So that was just as before, we've now mapped them all individually across the keyboard. And finally we need to go through and select all these and then move their chain selectors across. So I mean that's the only bit that might just take a little bit of time, you just got to just do that carefully. It'll take a minute. I won't do it now because it'll be infuriating to watch, no doubt. So, but I mean that's the gist of it. So I mean that's only a 5-minute job, probably less than that, to map all of these sounds into a single sampler, and then you, as before, I'd just group it into a instrument rack, and then get to mapping some macros. Whichever you want. Obviously, the most important one being this chain selector. So you can go up here, map to macro, and then that becomes your sound selector. So that's the trick basically. So I mean, I think that's something that you could easily spend an hour going through a whole bunch of sample packs, building these instruments and mapping some macros and having a play. One reason also why it's good is because a lot of the time you'll be playing with these sounds and you'll get that inspiration, which the lack of which was the reason you started going through this process anyway. So I mean these packs in particular just got so many amazing sounds in them. Then you start playing and before you know it you've got something you've got something really sounding good. Other uses of this technique, not necessarily the multi-sample mapping, but for example I have I make house music, so a lot of the time I like having 808s for bass lines. So I've taken a bunch of 808 kicks and I've done a similar sort of thing. I've taken them, I've put them all into a sampler. Actually that's not the right one. So I've taken these kicks, so these are all 808 kicks that were recorded through a Fairchild compressor, and I've done a similar sort of thing here. So I've dropped them all into here and then I've used the chain selector to separate them. So and also, I mean, I put them through a spectrum to find out what their root notes were, so that's why those ones are all slightly different. And then so I have this rack now, so if I want to have a kind of an 808 bass line, I have this ability to, just drop this in. I can program the bass line, however it is, and then once that's going, I can then just easily swap between different 808 sounds by playing with this sound select tool. And then I've just pick some other ones. I've got a low cut EQ, a high cut EQ, level, and then just the normal envelopes. So that's just one. Again, that's just one use. I mean, you could do this for any number of different types of sounds. You could make it for claps or snares. I have a massive one full of kick drums, and you could double it up. You could have kick layering. You could have, all sorts of things that you can do with this sampler. It's a really, really, really powerful piece of kit. Okay, that's it. I think I've just about covered everything that I wanted to say about this technique. Hopefully somebody's found it useful. Again, sorry about my voice, but yeah, hopefully somebody will get some use out of this. Okay, cheers.